I did a few videos that were in black and white recently, and it put me in mind of some old black and white photos I used to love of artists in Paris that I had discovered in library books as a kid. I was fascinated by photos of Picasso in particular in his earliest days in Paris, because Paris was like a little community of artists at the turn of the 20th century, and many new ideas were invented there that still have a huge influence on artists today. As a kid, I thought it sounded like great fun to have a job where all your pals painted and talked about painting all the time. So I loved looking at the photos of Picasso with his girlfriend Fernande, who used to model for him, or outside his studio on his own on the cobbled street under one of the street gas lights that earned Paris the nickname of the City of Light, La Ville Lumière. I'll tell you how the Bateau Lavoir studio got its name later, which amused me no end when I read about it. But here the studio I'm drawing is an atelier he worked in for a long time, from 1936 right through the war and into the 50s, even while the Nazis occupied Paris. He had been an international success since the early 1900s, with even the New York Times devoting full pages to feting the eccentric Cubists. He painted his huge Spanish Republican government commissioned canvas, Guernica, here, in response to a bombing by Franco's forces in that small town in the country he came from. It was a fine studio, and he was famous now, but he claimed to have been happiest in his earliest days in Paris at his studio in the Bateau Lavoir in Montmartre, where it was said that he was at times so poor that his studio lacked furniture, and 20 workshops and artist studios shared the same hole in the ground to squat over by necessity. Times were good there, in other ways, for Picasso, who remembered the adventures he had there later on, with fondness, expressing the wish that he could go back to that time. The Bateau Lavoir was named after the washing barges on the Seine because it rocked so when it was windy out, being of rickety and flimsy construction. But it had the same wonderful raking light that his fancier atelier studio that I'm drawing would later feature. Its skylights at an angle that let in light well to paint by, when he wasn't painting at night, by lamplight. Fernand had helped inspire him too, as well as the other artists around him in Paris, those he mingled with and got ideas from, as well as the generations of artists before, whether classical or pagan or primitive. Indeed, when he and Fernand had a brief break in their relationship, the women he met in the brothels of Barcelona would inspire the first big canvas of his shocking and very different new way of painting that would open the path further for his development of the new Cubist style. Women were a constant subject throughout his work, and he enjoyed the curves and planes of their faces and bodies more as his art matured. The many painters, musicians, and even circus performers added to the excitement of Montmartre, and these were among his earliest artistic subjects in Paris, before his Cubist explorations. In 1900, he was newly arrived from Spain and full of confidence in his calling as an artist, ready to explore and conquer Paris through his art. He and his great friend Georges Braque together invented the new art called Cubism, which topped even the Impressionists and those wildest of art beasts, the Fauve. Picasso claimed himself and Braque were like climbers roped together as they scaled a mountain, trying to invent the new form of art that came to be known as Cubism. The art world was electric, and everyone loved the shocks. The artistic shockwaves that the Demoiselles d'Avignon created has often been described as seismic in nature, something akin to the effect the Impressionists had on landscape painting, with an even more violent charge on the topic and approach to the subject. It was a time of innovations and upheavals in art, and Paris was right at the centre of it, and Picasso a very important figure in that change. Picasso claimed that good artists copy and great artists steal, knowing that creativity is where we find it, in whatever fires up our imagination and drives us to make art from what we see. He also claimed that he'd spent a lifetime trying to maintain the kind of freshness of vision that a child had. Everything was about art for him, and there was no aspect of his life that wasn't about obsession with art. No wonder I got a bit obsessed with finding out about him when I first came across those black and white images of an art life lived long ago.